Hey, if you're here, you know why we're here, and thanks for joining. It is Friday, and it's time to talk about a book, and today that book is Jackal by Erin Adams. This has been a pretty buzzy debut, or at least I've been seeing it around a lot, and have been very, very excited about it, intrigued by the blurb, so it was buzzy for me at least, if for no one else. And I'm very happy to report that it lived up to my expectations. It is a book that sits in the kind of in-between of horror and thriller, which I really enjoy. However, the mixed reviews that I have peeked at seem to stem from not anticipating the horror aspect of things. So know that going in because it is going to adjust your reading experience. However, it becomes, to my reading, evident pretty early in here that we have some element of the supernatural, but it does kind of straddle that line really well, and it builds the tension and sets us in this kind of fevered state with a narrator that isn't quite reliable, and so we're always kind of wondering. However, there is a point in the point of view of the storytelling that does allude a little bit more to that supernatural element, and I'm not going to get into how deep that is, but I do think it tied things together pretty nicely. And I kind of realized this year as a self-proclaimed scaredy pants who still does gravitate toward things with the tension and the spookiness and the atmosphere and all of that, that it is very hard and very delicate to kind of play with the horror aspect of things. Because you are in a medium where you have to manipulate your audience's emotions strictly through the written word. And the payoff of that, you're not going to be able to do as much through like spectacle, right? You're not going to be able to build that emotional crescendo through music. And honestly, I found it very interesting because I did look at the blurb for this author because I was really engaged with the writing. I'm like, this is really strong storytelling. It's a strong debut. I'm interested. And I wanted to just know more about her deal. And she is, probably unsurprisingly, a playwright as well. And I was like, dang it, she's gonna get me back on New Play Exchange, which, to be fair, I probably never should have canceled my subscription. It's like $10 a year. How much money am I really saving? But I am very interested, slight tangent before we really dive into the meat of this, in storytelling and horror on the stage, because it's something that we don't see as much. And I'm not talking like Woman in Black level, because I am a scaredy pants, as, you know, previously stated, and I don't know that I can handle the kind of jump scare of that, but I'm very interested in how she would craft that same tension and horror on the stage, because I do think that one of the plays that I saw on her website had that potential. I have a friend, Andrew Kramer, who is really good at doing this on the stage, and I think that's part of the reason I gravitate to his work so much, is just the inventiveness of it and playing with form and new ways to tell stories, and what are the ways that we can play with all of that. And it feels weird to be like, oh yeah, of course she's a playwright in this very much a novel, but it is really utilizing the form of the novel. It isn't experimental in the form to the point of being inaccessible or unfamiliar, but it is also very intentional about the form. So we are following Liz, our protagonist, in the first person as she is going home for her best friend's wedding. And Liz is also in a moment of change in her own life. She has gotten out of a long-term relationship, a relationship where there was, I believe they were engaged. And so she is in between in many ways. And coming home, she finds out that the wedding that her best friend is having is actually going to be in the woods, also an in-between place, and a place Liz doesn't want to go back to. Because when they were in high school, there was a party out in the woods, bonfire night, and this party got broken up and raided and sent the kids running into the woods. And one of those teens, Keisha, didn't make it out alive. And so there is a history there, but we also find out a little bit more about Liz and how she may have actually seen Keisha in those last moments. There is something unresolved about that whole night, but Liz's memory is blocked. And like I said, Liz kind of is an unreliable narrator, but it is kind of a slow burn into that. And I think that that's really important and also part of what makes it so successful, because we start with a woman who is not in a great, happy place. She doesn't want to be back here, but she wants to be here to support her friend. Her mother is pressuring her. She's not looking forward to being a Black woman going back to a small town in 2017, which is when the contemporary storyline of this is set. And so as a reader, I am primed to be on her side. And so she goes to this wedding, she's getting through it, she's celebrating her friend, and her goddaughter Caroline goes missing. She was out playing with some lights with some other kids. Liz goes in to get herself a drink and to get Caroline a Shirley Temple, gets distracted, goes back out, and Caroline is gone. And so this sets up a lot of things, especially in kind of like priming us as readers to start to question Liz, even though I feel like as a reader, I got there much later. The course of the book, we do kind of follow Liz's drinking a little bit, and as the tension rises and as we get further in the narrative, it is evident to be a problem. I was like, I get it, but I also would have loved to see the idea of an unreliable narrator or a way to twist us as readers to start to question Liz's judgment as we enter the higher stakes and the higher tension point of, kind of like the plot without it being related to alcohol, because I feel like that's what we go back to a lot. That being said, alcohol is very normalized and a lot of people do struggle with it. So I don't want to take away from that either. But I feel like, especially in the storytelling, I just would have liked to see something a little different. And then the thing that also kind of permeates the rest of it with this setup, and I think is one of Liz's driving forces, you can see kind of like the drama machinations of it in that this is one of Liz's goals and objectives throughout the book. It's what's pushing her forward. It is what's spurring the action. She was supposed to be watching Caroline. She'd had a conversation with her friend Melanie's brother, who she doesn't really get along with because he has been racist to her in the past, but she's putting on a face for her friend and pushing through for her goddaughter as well. And so there's this kind of lingering accusation that is articulated and spoken out loud later, but is initially not, in that very small town kind of hovering, lingering, pressing kind of way, that Liz lost Caroline and this was her fault. And this really pissed me off for a lot of the book. I understand it, but I was very emotionally engaged with that, both from Liz as kind of something she was fighting within herself, which I understand, and then also those accusations from the people that were close to Caroline and are supposed to be close to Liz, because they were at a barn wedding, essentially. Caroline was out playing. No one was watching her when Liz went out there. And at these kind of weddings, I'm sure a lot of us have been to them, kids are just running around. If you're not watching your kid, you're not watching your kid. Liz had kind of inherited that job by just wandering out, but in these kind of events, people wander in and out, and there's this kind of unspoken agreement that everyone is watching the kids. And maybe it's because I'm not a parent, but it just feels really unfair to have laid that at Liz's feet when she had not taken on the responsibility of watching the kids all night, and when there were tons of other adults in the room that could have been checking in on the kids. Because when Liz first goes looking for Caroline, when she basically raises the alarm that she has gone missing, all of the adults are like, oh yeah, she's out playing with the lights. So they're not really actively engaged either. But this is also used as a tool to kind of forward the tensions that become evident in the town, especially with Liz as a Black woman. And it is a very segregated town, and Liz lives in the nicer portion of town because her mother is a doctor. And so she really is inhabiting this liminal space and this in-between, which is part of the reason the woods are just so perfect and ingenious in all of this. We're really looking at that in-between and what it means to kind of straddle that edge in so many ways. And so Caroline's disappearance spurs Liz on, and in her mind, she also connects it to the disappearance of Keisha when she was a teen, which puts her on the path to all of the young Black girls and young Black women who have gone missing around the summer solstice and show up murdered. But their deaths are never declared a murder, and in Liz's search, it becomes evident that only a small portion of the community really views this as a problem and recognizes that there is a real and present danger. There is a rhyme that is repeated throughout about not looking at the shadows and not listening to the thing that calls your name in the dark. And the way that different portions of the community interact with that, whether it reflects a very real threat and warning, or whether it's like a fun and quirky rhyme, is part of what is being played on. And so as Liz really goes further and further down this investigative kind of rabbit hole, even as it feels like she's being placed at the center of things via evidence, and things start happening around her that make her question her own judgment in some ways and who she can trust. And the mystery aspect of this was very interesting because I catch myself overthinking. I'm an overthinker. So sometimes I can call the mystery, right off the bat. And sometimes I'm like, well, no, that's too obvious. And here I felt like I was kind of playing that. I had inklings onto where that was going and how it all fell out. But the thing is, everyone is basically a real and present danger for Liz in this world. So even if they are not necessarily behind the murders, Liz is still navigating a really precarious kind of landscape full of traps. And even the relationships she really values and trusts start to bend, especially her relationship with her best friend Melissa, because Melissa is a white woman. And so as the investigation goes on and she is kind of facing the reality of her daughter being gone and the window of opportunity of getting her back closing, and Liz starts bringing her this research, she doesn't want to hear it, even though her daughter is mixed. She's a young Black girl. And so it reveals a lot of the underlying tensions regarding race and class in this community. So Liz is really chasing down answers, and we have this real and present danger, these very high stakes, and this tense environment combined with a narrator who, as we move further into the story, we're not sure if we can completely trust, and elements of the odd start slipping in more. But is it elements of the odd, or is it just that Liz isn't sleeping and that there is clearly someone trying to intimidate her? There's a car following her. Someone's leaving a dead deer at her mom's house. Like, what exactly is going on? And I think if we had just Liz's point of view, there would be a little bit more question there. However, we don't. We also have these stories interspersed from all of the girls who have gone missing over the years. And I thought that this was a really lovely touch because it was giving these girls back their stories. And it is gruesome. We know what the end of these girls' stories is, and we're reminded at the end of each section. But the section really celebrates these young women for who they were and what they were doing, and their vivacity and their passion, and just the way that they moved about the world, and celebrated that, and celebrated the space that they took up, and recognized it. And we start on one of these stories that I think sets the tone so well, and also made me cry. Like, I teared up at this story that I knew was essentially a prologue. I knew what we were setting up here, but there was something so immediate about it and so raw about it in a genre where it can be so easy to put things at a distance for the sake of solving the puzzle. And so I would warn readers against that immediacy and that rawness, in the sense that it is very emotionally charged. There is an acknowledged violence, and that is hard. It is hard to know the end of these young women. Now, where the telling of these stories is indicative of the kind of odd or supernatural bend to the narrative is that as we move through more of them, it becomes more evident that this isn't a straightforward kind of cut narrative. We're not just moving into the third person. There is someone else telling us about these young women. This is a very specific and pointed point of view, and a somewhat omniscient point of view amidst all of that. So how do you get that? What is that? Who is that? There is a lot of question there. And it also tinges those stories slightly as it becomes evident who, what have you is telling that. But there's also something very interesting in that point of view and that switch of that point of view and experimenting with that, as well as I do think it is reclaimed at the end in terms of those young women and their stories. But everything is in a pressure cooker in this narrative and in a transition and in a liminal space. We open up with the concept of deindustrialization and kind of Rust Belt small towns and the tensions there. And then we move into 2017 America, which is a different kind of tension, which has been largely caused by our inability to really face down the tensions and struggles caused by the deindustrialization Rust Belt communities and the needs there and the tensions and resentments that have kind of slowly and silently festered there or have been actively stoked. And so we are facing both the reality of this, we are very rooted in the reality of it and the way the system is broken and what is happening, but there's also a larger symbolic kind of exploration at work, and I think that they are married together very well. Like I said, I think the resolution of that, how it kind of all falls out at the end, is very hard to maneuver and delicate. And I think that this felt very intentional and powerful and empowering in some ways, while also not allowing us as readers or our characters as characters to escape without some sort of cost. We do not come out unscathed. And so, as someone who hasn't been reading a lot of thrillers lately, I think that this has a nice balance, like I said, to the reality and the supernatural, and they really complement each other and work together. But also, the real portion of this feels very grounded, even in the extreme of it, and it's articulating tensions that many would rather ignore and facing us with both real and supernatural horrors and making us stare those down. So this was fast paced, it was atmospheric, it was engaging, it was charged, it was hard and violent at times. But I think it had something to say, something important to say, as well as just being an entertaining read, which feels very odd to say about something where violence like this is interrogated. But I mean, it's a thriller, it's a mystery, it's a horror. It's about a little bit staring down that darkness and coming out on the other side. And the way that the storytelling was maneuvered in this was just really engaging and thoughtful as well. But if you read this book, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. If you haven't, but like horror, like thrillers, I would really encourage you to pick this up. I thought it was an incredibly strong debut. So I will definitely be keeping my eye out for more work from Erin E. Adams. In the meantime, thanks for hanging out. Read something good, like and subscribe if you feel like it, and yeah, bye.